Welcome to my channel, The Good Book Tales. In today's video, we are stepping back over 2,000 years to a time when the world was waiting for hope. A time when the night skies carried whispers of a promise, and a small town in the hills of Judea was about to become the center of history. This is the birth of Jesus, a story that has been told for generations, but tonight we will walk into it as if we are there. Feeling the dust of the roads, hearing the voices of the people, and sensing the heartbeat of a world about to change. It begins not with a king in a palace, but with a young woman in a quiet village called Nazareth. Her name was Mary. She was humble, gentle, and lived a simple life. She could never have imagined that her story would echo across centuries. But one night, the ordinary world shifted. A messenger from heaven appeared to her, and his words would shake the course of her life forever. He spoke of a child, a holy child, who would be called the Son of the Most High. Mary's heart raced. Fear and wonder fought for space inside her. How could this be? She was just a village girl. Yet the angel's words stayed in her mind, lighting a fire she couldn't explain. Far from Nazareth, in the courts of kings and the records of empires, Rome was commanding the known world. Caesar Augustus had just ordered a census. Every person had to return to their ancestral town to be counted. The decree reached Nazareth, and Mary, now carrying the promised child, would have to travel with Joseph, her betrothed, all the way to Bethlehem. The road would be long, dusty, and dangerous. Every step brought them closer to a prophecy whispered by prophets long ago. But something else was happening far beyond Judea. In distant lands, wise men studied the skies. They were scholars, watchers of the heavens, and they saw a sign unlike anything before. A brilliant star rising in the east. They knew it meant a king had been born. Their journey would take them across deserts and kingdoms, guided by the light that seemed to pulse with destiny. Meanwhile, in the shadowed halls of Jerusalem, King Herod heard rumors of this child. The thought of a rival king unsettled him. His mind began to turn, dark and calculating. If there was truly one born to rule, Herod would stop at nothing to protect his throne. In the cold quiet of the night, his plans began to take shape. As Mary and Joseph approached Bethlehem, the town was already crowded with travelers. Every inn was full. Doors closed. Voices turned them away. The pains of labor were beginning. Joseph's eyes searched desperately for shelter. The night air was heavy, the streets alive with strangers, and somewhere above them, that same strange star burned brighter than ever. But no one in Bethlehem yet knew. The moment that would divide history was only hours away. The streets of Bethlehem were alive with noise, but for Mary and Joseph, the world felt narrowed to each step they took. Joseph tried to hide his worry, keeping his voice calm, though inside he was praying for a miracle. Mary's face showed the strain of the journey, yet there was a quiet strength in her eyes. She remembered the angel's words, and though she didn't understand everything, she knew this was no ordinary child she was carrying. The night air smelled of dust and bread baking in the crowded homes, but they had no door to enter, no room to rest. Somewhere in the distance, a group of shepherds kept watch over their flocks in the fields. They were used to long nights under the open sky, the crackle of their small fires keeping the cold away. But this night felt different. The stars seemed sharper, the silence heavier between the bleating of sheep. These men had no idea that before dawn their lives would be changed by a message that would send them running through the streets of Bethlehem. Far away, the wise men continued their journey, crossing harsh deserts and unfamiliar lands. They followed the strange star without question, its glow leading them onward. At night, they would speak in hushed voices about what they might find. A child destined to be a king, foretold by ancient prophecies they had studied for years. But even their wisdom could not prepare them for the truth waiting at the end of their road. In Jerusalem, King Herod's palace stood in stark contrast to the humble streets of Bethlehem. His halls were filled with wealth, yet fear gnawed at him. He called for the chief priests and scribes, demanding to know where the Messiah was to be born. They answered from the ancient scrolls, "In Bethlehem of Judea." Herod smiled, but it was the kind of smile that hides dangerous intent. He spoke of wanting to worship the child, but his heart was fixed on destroying anything that could threaten his rule. Back on the road, Mary clutched Joseph's hand as they searched for shelter. They could hear laughter and music spilling from crowded rooms, but no one seemed to notice the urgency in Joseph's voice. Each refusal felt heavier than the last. The streets grew quieter as the night deepened, and the only constant was that star, unmoving in the sky, as if watching and waiting. Somewhere in the stillness, the moment they had been walking toward for days was about to begin, but in a place they never could have imagined. In the fields outside Bethlehem, the shepherds huddled closer to their fire. The night was cold, but it wasn't the chill that made their hands tremble. A strange stillness had settled over the hills, as if even the wind was holding its breath. One of them glanced at the sky and frowned. The star that had been glowing so brightly seemed almost alive, its light spilling across the land in a way he had never seen before. They spoke in low voices, wondering if it was an omen, though none could agree on what it meant. In another part of the land, the wise men rested beneath the same sky, but their thoughts were heavier. Supplies were running low, and the journey had been far longer than they expected. Yet, the star never wavered, and that unwavering light kept them moving. Each night they read the scrolls they carried with them, whispering over the words of prophecy that spoke of a ruler who would shepherd his people. But one question lingered in their minds. If this child was to be a king, why had the news not spread to every palace in the world? Meanwhile, inside the walls of Jerusalem, Herod's restlessness grew. He sent messengers to shadow the travelers, to report on anything unusual. He had no intention of bowing before a new king. Instead, he quietly prepared for the moment when he would strike. The thought of losing control made his heart pound with a dangerous mix of anger and fear. In Bethlehem, Mary and Joseph still moved from door to door. With every rejection, the night seemed colder, the streets emptier. But above them, the star's light did not fade. Somewhere between the shadows and the silence, the world was holding its breath for what was about to come. The streets of Bethlehem had grown silent, but Mary and Joseph's search had not ended. The glow of lanterns in nearby homes cast long shadows across the narrow alleys. Joseph's steps quickened, his arm around Mary as her breathing grew heavier. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and then the sound of voices faded into the stillness. Every door they knocked on brought the same answer: no room. The weight of urgency pressed harder with every passing minute. Out in the hills, the shepherds stirred restlessly. The fire crackled, but the air felt charged with something unseen. Then, in an instant, the quiet was shattered. A brilliant light blazed across the sky, brighter than the star itself, and the shepherds fell to the ground in fear. Voices like music filled the air, speaking of good news, of a Savior born that night in Bethlehem. The message was clear, yet the meaning was so vast they could hardly grasp it. Without hesitation, they gathered their flocks and began to run toward the town, hearts pounding with a mix of awe and urgency. Far away, the wise men crested a hill and caught sight of the star hanging directly over Bethlehem. Their journey was almost over, but their thoughts were heavy. They had stopped in Jerusalem to ask about the child, and the king's reaction had been unsettling. They knew now that their arrival might draw dangerous attention. Still, the light in the sky called them forward. In the palace, Herod's mind was set. His messengers had returned with news that the travelers were closing in on the town. The thought burned in him. Somewhere in that small, crowded village was the one he feared most, And as Mary and Joseph finally reached the edge of the town, a place of last resort stood before them, its door half open, waiting. Joseph stepped inside the dimly lit space, his eyes adjusting to the flickering glow of a single oil lamp. It was not an inn, nor even a guest room, but a stable. The scent of hay and the quiet shuffle of animals filled the air. It wasn't what he had hoped for, yet there was shelter here, and warmth. He turned to Mary, searching her face, and she gave a faint nod. The moment was too urgent for hesitation. Still, in the back of his mind, Joseph felt the weight of something larger unfolding, as if the walls of this humble place were holding more than just the two of them. Outside, the streets of Bethlehem were no longer quiet. Word of strange travelers had begun to spread. A few villagers whispered about the group of men approaching from the east, following a star as if it were a torch, guiding them to a secret. Others spoke of shepherds who had been seen running toward the town in the middle of the night, their faces alight with excitement and fear. The atmosphere was shifting, and not everyone welcomed it. In the shadows near the edge of town, a cloaked rider dismounted his horse. He was one of Herod's messengers, sent to watch, to listen, and to report back the moment anything unusual happened. He blended into the crowd, moving from one street to another, scanning faces, searching for signs of the child his king so desperately wanted to find. His orders were clear, but what he might have to do if he found the family weighed heavily in his mind. Meanwhile, the wise men were closer than anyone realized. They had taken a narrow path into Bethlehem to avoid drawing attention, but the star's light seemed to pierce the rooftops, almost pointing to one spot in the town. They exchanged uneasy glances, wondering if they were the only ones who could see it so clearly. In the stable, Mary's breathing grew quicker. Joseph knelt beside her, offering what comfort he could, though he knew the moment was near. But before anything could happen, a sound outside made him freeze. Footsteps, many of them, drawing nearer. Whether they were coming to help or to harm, he could not yet tell. All he knew was that the night had just taken a turn, and the quiet shelter they had found might no longer be safe. The footsteps grew louder, and Joseph rose quickly, placing himself between Mary and the entrance. The door creaked open, and for a tense heartbeat he expected soldiers. Instead, the dim light revealed shepherds, their faces flushed from running, eyes wide with wonder. They spoke all at once, their voices tumbling over each other, telling of the blinding light in the sky, and the heavenly voices declaring that a Savior had been born that night in Bethlehem. Their words carried no malice, only awe, and Joseph felt his tension ease, though he remained alert. Moments later, the wise men appeared at the stable's entrance. Their long journey had left them weary, but their eyes shone with the same light that seemed to glow in the star above. They stepped forward reverently, laying gifts before Mary: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Each gift held meaning they could only partly understand, yet they knew they were in the presence of someone greater than any king they had ever served. As Mary cradled the newborn in her arms, the air inside the stable felt different. Warmer, alive, almost as if time itself had paused to witness the moment. Outside, the night was still, the star fixed above them like a crown of light. The shepherds knelt in quiet worship, and even the animals seemed to stand in stillness. But in the midst of this peace, the cloaked figure at the edge of the crowd slipped away into the darkness. His eyes had seen enough. He knew this was the child Herod feared, and his duty was clear. Yet, as he mounted his horse, something in the scene he had witnessed weighed on him. A feeling he could not explain. Instead of riding straight to Jerusalem, he turned his horse toward the wilderness, vanishing into the hills. The wise men, sensing the danger, decided not to return to Herod as he had requested. In the quiet before dawn, they took a different road out of Bethlehem, slipping away without notice. The shepherds too left in silence, their hearts burning with the story they would tell for the rest of their lives. By morning, the stable looked like any other. But those who had been there knew the truth. The night had changed the world forever. And somewhere far away, a furious king waited for news that would never come. As the first light of morning touched the rooftops of Bethlehem, the star above began to fade into the pale sky. Inside the stable, Mary rested quietly, the newborn swaddled in her arms. Joseph watched her with a mixture of relief and gratitude. The chaos of the night had passed, and for a brief moment all was still. The sounds of the town waking drifted in, the clatter of pots, the call of merchants, but it felt like the world outside was unaware of what had happened in this humble place. The shepherds returned to their flocks, carrying the memory of the angel's message and the sight of the child lying in a manger. They shared the story with anyone who would listen, their voices filled with conviction. People listened with curiosity, some with disbelief, but the shepherds' joy could not be denied. The wise men had already gone, taking the longer hidden road home, their hearts stirred by what they had seen. They spoke quietly among themselves, wondering how the life of this small child would unfold and what his destiny would bring. Mary thought of the angel's words from months ago and the long journey that had brought them here. She knew her child's life would not be ordinary. The gifts from the wise men sat nearby, their meaning sinking in. Gold for a king, frankincense for worship, and myrrh for what was yet to come. She didn't understand it all, but she felt the weight of it in her heart. Joseph began making plans for their next steps. He knew Herod's interest in the child was dangerous, and though they had found peace for now, they could not remain here forever. Still, in this quiet morning, he allowed himself to breathe, trusting that the same God who had guided them so far would guide them again. And so, in a small corner of Bethlehem, life began for the child who had drawn strangers across deserts, stirred kings to fear, and filled shepherds with hope. The manger would be remembered, the night retold, and the star recalled for generations. And though the road ahead was uncertain, the promise of that night remained, that in the most humble of places, the greatest light had entered the world.